Okay, again with Sam Harris. So it's just covering like what he wrote after the election. So I did a part 1 video and I'm just doing a part 2 here. Okay, so reading this, now you might want to say that neither Harris nor Biden campaigned as a vocal trans activist, and that's true, but honestly, if you wanted to account for Harris's loss and Trump's win in the briefest possible space, and also indicate the hold that the far left had over Democratic politics in the Biden administration, I think it would be better to do better than juxtapose the following 2 facts. On his first day in office, Biden signed an executive order ensuring that trans girls could have access to girls' restrooms, locker rooms, and sports. Okay, so again, there's people saying Biden didn't campaign on trans issues. Maybe he didn't campaign on it, but when he was put in, again, he signed an executive order saying, like, ensuring they could have access to locker rooms, sports. Okay, and then it took him 2.5 years to sign an executive order addressing the chaos at the border. What more needs to be said about the degree to which the Democratic Party and the Biden administration lost touch with the will of the American people? So Fox News and these other outlets, they just hammer that point over and over because they understand the unpopularity of it with the American people. And we have politicians that do little about that. And if anything, they're passing bills that basically allow trans people in those spaces. Like, yes, that's going to be a problem. Okay, let's keep scrolling down. And the jury is still out on many questions here, and policy in Europe has changed radically in recent years for understandable reasons. This topic is a total mess, ethically and politically. Okay, it goes on to talk about the far left in recent years. Talks about Latinx. Okay, Latinx, as someone who's in education, I'm a graduate student. I'm getting a PhD in education right now. This is a term that the professors just use over and over. They use Latinx so frequently, and you look at how many Latinos went toward Trump. Like, there's a reason for it. No one likes the word Latinx except for a few people that are on college campuses. The whole point of the word is because they don't want to use Latino or Latina because they feel like it's gendering people, which no one cares about that. You might think another lecture about sensitive Halloween costumes might do the trick. Much of Democratic politics has become a bad at Saturday Night Live sketch. Democrats simply have to understand that this is one of the reasons that we're getting 4 more years of Trump, 4 more years of this man holding more power and responsibility than any person on earth. Okay, sure, inflation didn't help, but Harris and the Dems couldn't change the price of groceries. They could control whether the vice president gave a rational accounting of why she no longer supports taxpayer-funded gender reassignment surgeries for undocumented immigrants. You might not think that's an issue. I've seen people in Reddit comments that are saying, well, look at the exit polls. Here's the question. Are they putting the trans issue in exit polls? Are they asking people? Are they even giving them the choice to select that? I heard people outraged about the idea of taxpayer dollars going toward reassignment surgeries for undocumented people. Okay, literally everyone I know who voted for Trump, and this includes some extraordinarily influential people like Elon, literally everyone was focused on cultural issues. Same for me. Maybe it's because I'm in Utah, but all my friends that are my age, even younger students that are in their early 20s that I taught 5 to 6 years ago, they all care about these cultural issues. You can say it's anecdotal, but maybe we don't have the polling data to do it. Someone create a poll then. Ask people what they think about these issues. It wasn't inflation for them. It was trans activism. The insanity at the southern border, DEI policies, unwillingness of Democratic DA and mayors to do anything about what happens when you go into a CVS and you have to call a locksmith to get razors. Yeah, they do that because the homeless problem is so out of control, and you have homeless people doing drugs out on the streets of San Francisco and other major cities. Okay, yeah, it goes on about homelessness. Democrats don't want to police the streets, they want to police the language. Talks about how there's whole sections of towns that look like they're zombie movies. He does mention Hamas supporters. I don't know how common that is compared to the other things. Here's one clue on the path back to sanity on this issue. which you may have missed. The hijab is not a symbol of female empowerment. A lot of people agree with Sam on that type of thing, but I'm seeing people defending the trans issue and saying that Democrats shouldn't distance themselves from it. There's simply no question that Democratic moral confusion on many of these issues cost Harris millions of votes. Yes, I agree. So that's the reckoning that has to happen now among Democrats, and I hope it does. But the concern now is that 4 more years of Trump and Trumpism will prevent it. Trump is such a provocation to the left and to liberal institutions that Democrats could find themselves doubling down on all their delusions. Needless to say, this will be exactly what Trump and the MAGA cult want, because it will be politically suicidal. If you are a Democrat who voted for Harris, please absorb this. You lost more people of color than ever in a presidential election while running against Archie Bunker. Worse, Trump is actually supported by real racists and white supremacists, and that still wasn't enough of a problem. Who do you think your identity politics is for? You're really going to keep celebrating pornographers of racial grievance like Ta-Nehisi Coates or Ibram X. Kendi? Yeah, Kendi, again, Kendi says that the solution for past discrimination is future discrimination. Who's defending that? Why are we defending that? You really think racism is the problem in America, and that what we saw this week was just a victory for white male identity politics? That's how you're going to explain Trump's popularity at this point. Trump gained support from every racial group except white people, where he lost 1 percentage point compared to where he was in 2020. You're going to chalk that up to racism. Some are going to say, yeah, these people have internalized racism against themselves. Okay, talks about people saying America was never going to elect a black woman for president. He's saying that's not the issue. If you keep this up, you'll get Candace Owens someday. Okay, highlighting how he sees the frustration people have with the progressive orthodoxy that infects our institutions, the push to censor, thought policing, gaslighting, lying. Okay, he's talking about how he saw people who talked about the problem of jihadism in Islam, how they would get basically tarred as racist. People would accuse them of being racist. For years, okay, this is him. For years, I witnessed journalists obfuscate about the threat of Islamic extremism. Someone was found stabbing people in a European city or mowing them down with his car, shouting Allahu Akbar, and it would be reported that the motive for the crime was still mysterious and the perpetrator would be described at most as an immigrant. That's ridiculous right there. Who's defending that? Who's defending jihadism at this point? We can't say that basically extremist Islamist ideals were responsible for deaths and for terrorist attacks. So we're afraid that that might create more like anger toward this community. Okay, right here. Elon Musk never corrects his errors. Tucker Carlson never corrects his errors. Donald Trump never makes errors because he stops lying, or because he never stops lying. He's playing tennis without the net, and his fans love it. Okay, brings up the idea Joe Rogan's not a substitute for Wall Street Journal. He blames Trump for how divisive the politics have become, saying how Trump's already caused damage to our democracy. Okay, just talking about here, just Trump and Elon, how they were prepared to They're prepared to basically fight it if it was close. Okay, right here. Where do we send the bill for the damage that has been done to our country? Half of our country just elected a man to the presidency who they know would not have accepted the results of the last election had he lost. Harris conceded the next day, as everyone knew she would. It's already the ruination of our politics. This is what the path of fascism looks like. We're already on it. Nothing hypothetical about this. Okay, so here's what he says. It's true. We're returning a man to the Oval Office who is sitting president would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power and who tried to steal the 2020 election, all the while claiming it was being stolen from him. He has lied about this ever since, knowing that these lies stand as a continuous provocation of violence. And there are court cases pending seeking to hold him accountable for all of this. Cases which now that he'll be in control of the Justice Department will be dismissed. We're putting Trump back in power when we know that he can't honestly discharge his oath of office because he has no respect for the Constitution. And half our society is not only willing to run this risk, they're positively jubilant about it. At a minimum, you should acknowledge that these events have seriously injured our politics, again, whatever happens over the next 4 years. This is what he wants to say to Joe Rogan, other podcasters. You can't have it both ways. You don't get to say that this was the podcast election and that these long-form conversations are incredibly important for people to hear so they can make up their minds about who to vote for and then take no journalistic responsibility whatsoever to get your facts straight or to expose obvious lies when you're talking to the most prolific liar on earth. You don't get to spout endless conspiracy theories about how our election system is dangerously broken and vulnerable to fraud, and then when your candidate wins, say, oh well, Trump's victory was just too big for them to rig the election. No, how about realizing that there was nothing significantly wrong with our election system in the first place, and all these concerns about fraud were lies coming from your candidate and his surrogates. Yeah, that's true. Joe Rogan, he didn't fact check Trump at all. And then after, he just laughed and said, oh, it looks like it wasn't rigged. Like, that's really funny that he allowed Trump to spread that on his platform. Every podcaster who interviewed Trump managed to make it seem like all the bad things that were ever said about him were the result of some left-wing elite media conspiracy. To interview Trump or his surrogates responsibly would have required that you put them on the spot for any number of odious things he has said and done, and for things he said he intends to do in his second term, all of which are well documented and many of which should be totally disqualifying in a presidential candidate. It's not enough to just turn on the microphone and have a conversation. It doesn't matter that it's 3 hours long if all you're going to do is launder the man's lies by ignoring them in the interest of maintaining good vibes. There is a complacency and an amorality to the way you approach this that was actively harmful. It talks about how things aren't really fair at Twitter now. Do you think you'd feel the same way if a left-wing billionaire was boosting activist garbage to his 200 million followers every hour on the hour? Perhaps a note to journalists, scientists, writers, and other people with actual reputations to protect and lives to live. None of this gets any better until you all decide to leave X. You know it's a cesspool. You know it's harming our society. Most of you know it's harming your lives personally by being there and making it seem like everyone has to be there because everyone is there. You're helping to build the tool to make fact-based conversations impossible. Our society is being ridden by lies and social media, and X in particular is largely responsible for this. Of course, I get that some breaking news happens there first and some might only happen there, but if that's a feature of social media that we must conserve, then we have to instantiate it elsewhere, not on a platform that is owned and run entirely, dominated by a meme junkie who's lost all his principles. So, I mean, where else can people go? Would threads be better, like Instagram threads? Like I've never been big into Twitter. I can't weigh in too much on this. Once again, everything I've been talking about and complaining that has already happened, but looking forward, there are reasons to be worried about a second Trump term. Is RFK Jr. really going to be setting medical policy for the country? That should make your head explode. Is Trump going to weaken our international alliances? He's already put, since the time that Sam wrote this, he's put Pete Hegseth, Fox News commentator, as Secretary of Defense. He's putting in Tulsi Gabbard, I believe, Director of National Intelligence. When people argue that she's been a Russian asset for a long time, is Trump going to call the My Pillow guy and the Pizzagate dummies for advice on how to run the world? Or will he suddenly pivot and surround himself with competent ethical advisors? Look at Matt Gaetz. The guy's under investigation for being with minors. Needless to say, I will respond to whatever happens on this podcast, but I'm not going to spend the next 4 years obsessing about Trump. As I said before, I consider him one of the greatest opportunity costs for humanity to appear in my lifetime. The fact we've had to think about this man continuously for a decade is just an incredible piece of bad luck. So I'm going to do my best to pick my moments. I'm sure there'll be many over the next 4 years, but I'm just not willing to give more of my time to politics than is absolutely necessary. And I'll be sure to tell you when I receive that first IRS audit. Okay, yeah, good stuff by Sam. Again, people associate the left with being easy on homelessness, accommodating them too much, allowing them to do drugs, allowing trans women to be in women's spaces like locker rooms in sports. And those are not popular issues. Yes, the economy had an impact. Yes, the messaging and the framing and the propaganda on Fox News and Joe Rogan and these podcasters not fact-checking Trump and the cult of Trump, all of those also had a big impact. But to deny that Democrats clinging to the trans issue and not pushing back against it further, and same with our institutions, to deny that had an impact seems to be denying reality. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, go ahead, like and subscribe for more.